Welcome to The Explainer. We often get caught up in the big headlines, the famous names in our history books. But today, we're going to peel back that layer and look at what really makes our world tick. So, when you think about history, what comes to mind? Probably famous leaders, right? Big, epic battles. But what if I told you the real story, the real engine of change, is something much deeper? We're talking about fundamental currents that have shaped everything, our past, our present, and yeah, they're definitely shaping our future, too. Okay, so let's get into it. We're going to look at this through a really cool framework, 4 fundamental forces. And to do that, we're going to tell 4 completely different stories. We'll talk about the car, massive earthquakes, indigenous art, and a group of super powerful Chinese merchants. Sounds random, I know, but stick with me, because when you put them all together, they show you how our world actually works.
First up, technology. And honestly, what better way to see its power than with the invention that literally put the entire world on wheels? I'm talking, of course, about the automobile.
It's funny to think about now, but back in the late 1800s, the future of the car was totally up for grabs. It was this huge three-way race. You had steam, you had electric, and you had gasoline. Steam had an early lead, but it kind of fizzled. So then you've got these quiet, clean electric cars on one side and these noisy, clunky gasoline engines coming out of Germany on the other. Seriously, at that point, it was anybody's game. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. If you were a betting person back then, you would not have put your money on gasoline. Not a chance. At the first big car show in New York in 1900, electric cars were the absolute darlings of the crowd. I mean, they were clean, they were quiet, super easy to drive. The gas cars? People saw them as the noisy, smelly, dirty underdogs. Just a tiny fraction of people were interested. So what happened? How did the underdog win so completely? Well, it all came down to one single invention. See, before 1911, starting a gas car was a nightmare. You had to use this big, dangerous hand crank. But then came the electric self-starter. And just like that, poof, the biggest problem with gasoline cars vanished overnight. Suddenly, they were just as easy to start as an electric car. And that one little change, it paved the way for them to take over everything. And this is where you really see the power of technology to create these massive global ripple effects. Think about the Model T. It wasn't just a car. It completely rewired the planet. Suddenly, there was this insane demand for rubber, oil, and steel. This led to huge rubber plantations in Brazil, colonial interests in the oil-rich Middle East, and at the same time, all that industrial pollution from making them and driving them started changing the very air we breathe, all from one invention. Okay, so we've seen how a single piece of tech can completely reshape economies and politics. It's huge. But all our brilliant inventions, all our technology, it's all happening on a stage set by a force that is way, way more powerful. And that's nature. We might think we're in charge, but every now and then, the planet has a way of reminding us who's really boss. Imagine for a second you have no idea what an earthquake is. For almost all of human history, that was reality. The ground just starts shaking violently. It's terrifying. So people did what people do. They tried to explain it. And some of the greatest thinkers came up with ideas that sound wild to us now, like maybe the whole Earth is just floating on water and rocking back and forth. Or maybe there are giant thunderstorms happening underground. It sounds crazy, but these were humanity's first real attempts to make sense of this raw, incredible power. It wasn't until the 20th century that science finally cracked the code. And the answer was plate tectonics. The big idea is that the ground beneath our feet isn't solid. We're living on top of these enormous, puzzle-like plates that are constantly, slowly moving around. So earthquakes, they're not angry gods or monsters. They're just the inevitable, incredibly violent release of energy when these gigantic chunks of our planet scrape, collide, and grind against each other. And the power is just absolute. But here's a really critical point. When you look at the history of these devastating quakes, you see that the deadliest effects often come down to human choices. The awful death tolls in places like Iran or Haiti, they weren't just because of the earthquake itself. They were tragically magnified by things like poor building standards. It's a tough lesson, but it shows that how we prepare and how we build can be just as important as the power of the quake itself. So if nature sets the physical stage for our lives, our next force, culture, is what writes the script. It's the whole web of beliefs, ideas, and art that gives our lives meaning. It's how we remember our history and really how we tell the world who we are.
And here's a fascinating example of culture at work. For hundreds of years, when Europeans saw the amazing things created by indigenous peoples in the Americas, they had a problem. They didn't really see art. They saw artifacts, curiosities, things to be studied in a museum of natural history, not admired in an art gallery. And that one simple question, is it art or is it an artifact? It reveals so much about cultural perspective, doesn't it? But what's really cool is that some people got it right from the beginning. Way back in 1520, one of the greatest artists of the Renaissance, Albrecht Dürer, got to see a bunch of Aztec treasures. And he didn't see artifacts, he saw what they were. He called them wonderful works of art and was just blown away by the incredible skill and subtle ingenuity of the people who made them. And this really gets to the core of it. For these cultures, this art was deeply, profoundly functional. That wampum belt? It wasn't just pretty beads. It was a legally binding treaty. That painted bison robe? That's a historical document. It's a diplomatic passport. For them, art wasn't separate from life. It was the language of law, of history, and of politics. Okay, so culture creates these systems of meaning that hold a society together. Our fourth and final force, commerce, does something similar but on a global scale. It's that relentless drive to trade, to make a profit. And in doing so, it builds the physical and financial webs that connect every corner of the planet. Let me paint you a picture. For about 100 years, from the mid-1700s to the mid-1800s, if you were a Western trader and you wanted to do business with China, there was only one way in. You had to go through a very specific group of guys, the Hong merchants. See, the Chinese government didn't want to deal with foreigners directly. So these merchants became the ultimate gatekeepers. They did everything. They controlled the trade, they ran the port, they handled cultural issues, and they were the only line of communication to Chinese officials. And because they were the gatekeepers, they became rich. I mean, rich on a scale that's almost impossible to imagine today. The most successful one, a man named Hao, was worth an estimated 26 million US dollars back in the 1830s. Now that might not sound like a crazy number today, but to put that in perspective, that probably made him the single wealthiest person on the planet. And here's where the story gets really wild, showing how commerce connects everything. Hunkwood didn't just sit on his fortune in China. He invested it all over the world. And one of his biggest investments? The U.S. Transcontinental Railroad. Just think about that for a second. The money made from selling tea and silk in a single Chinese port was literally funding the project that would build the modern United States. It's an incredible connection. So there you have it, 4 massive forces. You've got technology, which is always pushing things forward, setting the pace of change. You have nature, which sets the rules of the game, the physical boundaries we live within. Then there's culture, which gives us our identity, it defines who we are. And finally, commerce, the engine that connects us all. And the key thing to remember is that none of these work alone. They are constantly twisting together, colliding and interacting to shape our world. Which really just leaves us with one big question, right? Looking forward, which of these forces, or what new mix of them, is going to write the next chapter of our human story?